Joining us today is Rob Mulcahy. He's a highly experienced S&C coach and sports scientist. He's worked across a range of different sports. He spent 5 years with the Clare senior footballers and also worked with the county's underage development squads and as Clare's head of performance. And last August, he joined Setanta College as their new head of athletic development. Thanks for coming on, Rob.
Thanks very much for having me, Kevin.
Is that the gist of your bio there? Is there anything I missed out? I know you worked with a lot of different sports as well, so there's a long list probably of different sports you went into.
Yeah, I suppose I'm 37 tomorrow, so I suppose I'm a good 15 years or more kind of working in strength and conditioning and different sports. Yeah, I started way back. I went to the UK initially. I worked in different sports there. I kind of worked in with a university. I worked in a couple interesting ones. I worked in Paralympic rowing. I worked in some martial arts. I worked in rugby. I got an opportunity to go up to Belfast and worked in Queen's University in Belfast. And I kind of got exposed to lots of different sports. It's only in the kind of the last probably 8 to 10 years I kind of got heavily involved in the GA. Like I wouldn't have a huge background in Gaelic games myself. I would
Mm.
have played as a kid, like, but it wouldn't have been like one of my primary interests sporting wise. So it's kind of ironic that I'm so involved in the GA, or is kind of known for the GA at this
Mm.
stage. But yeah, that's more or less it. Yeah, a lot of kind of individual sports to start off with, and then it's primarily been GA for the last bones of 10 years, I'd say. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, so as a Kerry man, um, your main sports wouldn't have been GA then, as you said, you played a bit when you were younger, but like basketball and swimming, were they the main two that you would have played?
Yeah. Like I suppose I was I probably played everything. Um, And then as I got into my kind of teenage years, I got very good at swimming. I made the Irish team underage at 13 was the first age I made it. So I kind of just naturally focused on swimming. Um, but my probably my big love sporting wise was basketball. I fell in love with basketball at a very early age, and I'm still playing now.
Okay.
But I played everything. Like I played football, I played rugby, I played I did athletics. But I suppose you kind of pick and choose, and your friend groups play certain sports, and you kind of fall into those sports. So I just kind of probably gravitated towards basketball from a kind of a love and interest thing, and just swimming. I just happened to be good at swimming. That was it. I
Mm.
never I probably spoke about this before. I never had like a love of swimming. It's a very demanding sport, especially at a high level. Like even at that age, you were training 5 days a week, some days twice a week. You're traveling up the country to train as well. So quite a demanding sport. It's not really as sociable as like a team based sport. So basketball is probably the big interest. Yeah, yeah.
Mm. And you mentioned a few different places that you worked there. Belfast would have been one. I know you worked under Mike McGurn for a while as well. And like as coaches, you would pick up different bits and pieces as you go through your career from different people, and you would obviously learn a lot from working with them. But for people who don't know him, he would have been heavily involved in Irish rugby for a long time. What were some stuff that you would have learned from him that you were able to take into your own coaching?
I think the best thing I got off Mike was, I suppose I went up young and I was very inexperienced, and it's something I've kind of taken away when I got into a position where I mentored coaches. Was he just gave me the opportunity to coach, and he kind of stood back and he didn't intervene. And then when he didn't need to intervene, he intervened at the right times. He was very measured in his approach. I'd say he was a coach kind of mentor without realizing he was a coach mentor from that side of things. So I got the opportunity to actually coach and make mistakes and get things right and then get the feedback from him. But probably the best thing about him was just, I think, was personality. Like he was just fantastic in that setting. Like he was phenomenal in a group setting, in a team setting. He was excellent at like creating really good relationships with players and teams. He could like dictate his own approach, like how he interacted with people depending on the situation, the needs. Like he just had an incredible understanding about how to deal with people, and I
Mm.
think that's why he was so successful across. Like he worked with Leeds, he worked over at United, he worked in professional basketball in America. Like his CV is huge, but I
Mm.
think it's just a testament to him as a practitioner. He was just an excellent people person, and obviously had a huge amount of knowledge to go with it.
Yeah. So look, I'm interested in, I guess, the process as an S&C coach when you're starting working with teams, say at a high club level or intercounty level. There will be a lot of coaches listening here who, at this time of year, and I'm starting working with a couple of teams myself at the moment, and it's just interesting. You're sitting down and you're planning out, say, training blocks for the next few months, and how things are going to line up. But how would you, if you were starting off with a team, how do you approach the year from an S&C context? Like obviously different factors like schedule come into it. You're sitting down with managers and coaches, but could you just kind of give an overview to how you would schedule out the S&C for a team?
Yeah, I suppose the first thing I always did, and I still do, is I just do a bit of a needs analysis. Um, and even as you get more experience and you probably feel like, I don't need to do needs analysis on the sport, or I need a needs analysis on the group, it's always a good way to start. It just helps kind of formalize the approach you're going to take. So if I start with say a club, for argument's sake, I'll try and gather as much information as I can on the sport, the demands of the sport, and get as much information on the players as possible. So if I can get any previous information, just to kind of give me a bit of a roadmap before I start like planning
Mm,
out, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and then I might realize quite quickly that that isn't appropriate or this is appropriate. Um, from there, I just get a kind of some baseline markers on the player. So I might do it could be really like non-invasive testing. If you start with a group that is very inexperienced, you might be able to do too much formalized testing. So I get a bit of kind of a basis of where they're at, and then from there, I'm going to like see what's my approach going to be around the areas I'll focus on. So it's not
mm,
always as straightforward as I'm going to have like a linear block approach. I'm going to do like hypertrophy, I'm going to do max strength, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and then I'm going to ramp right the way up the championship, and we're going to run the championship. Sometimes it might be as what's the big picture here, like where do I want these players in not just 1 year, or where do I want them in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and like how do I actually build something to get them there. A
mm,
lot of the times we focus on small things for too short a period of time. We focus on, I'm going to do 4 weeks of hypertrophy because that's what it says in the textbook.
mm,
I might realize that some of these guys need a year or more approach to get them to the appropriate strength and size to actually be able to compete at the sport. So, yeah, look, a big thing is just doing a needs analysis on the sport, the group, and where I'd like to see them get to, that they can actually compete at the sport. Can they deal with the demands of the sport? They're not going to break down. They're robust. So that would be it, like, and
mm,
then scheduling wise, yeah, I suppose I sit down then with the management and we try and schedule how the preceding months are going to go. So from I think the GA again is very traditional. Like everyone's like big conditioning blocks to the start of the year, but like looking at like um again what's appropriate. Can we integrate that a little bit more into the game? How can we become a supplementary element to the sport, as opposed to we do this and you do that. We have the
mm,
first 30 minutes, you have the next 30 minutes. We have the first 3 months, you have the next 3 months, and then we don't see each other. So how can we integrate a small bit better with each other? Um, yeah, and then planning is the big thing. Like I'd be huge on planning. Like I'd have my year planned out, my months planned out, my weeks planned out. I'd be huge on with my session planning. Um, Having a huge amount of reflective practice in my session planning, and the same with the coaches that I work with now that I oversee, trying to have as much reflective practice in their coaching process as possible. So after every session they reflect on it, informs their next session, they design
mm,
their next session, um, and then elements like within that session designing, um, and Paul Conner's done a nice bit of this in his research, like looking at like in session feedback in session. So designing as much of or planning as much of the session as possible prior to the session, and engaging um, in that session and trying to gather as much feedback from that session to inform your next sessions.
mm.
Um, yeah, so that I don't know if that answers the question, but that's
Yeah, yeah. I might just dig into a couple of things on that. Like the first one is testing, and like there's like some people have the opinion you do testing straight away, or maybe give the players a couple of weeks to fine tune in the gym or running on the pitch. Like, what's your approach to testing? And then
yeah.
say, is 3 rep max testing kind of best practice now for GA players, or what's your opinions on all that?
So the thing with testing kind of informs practice. So like you test because that's going to inform what you're going to do in your program. So it doesn't you don't have to test straight away.
Mm.
And sometimes you can't test straight away. Like if you've got an inexperienced group and you put them through a formal strength test, you're not learning anything. I'd rather players. I'd rather confidently say that the players can move really, really well and they're really proficient prior to them testing, because I'm not learning anything by putting someone through a test that they're not capable to do.
Mm.
But I will try and gather some information in an initial session. Like I'll try and look at how they move, because if I know how they move, then I know like how I can possibly program for them or the direction the program can go. Like if I know someone has got massive limitations in the squat pattern, I'm going to have to teach them that. I can't just say you're just going to front squat straight away. So
Mm.
I, the testing again dictates what you're going to do. Um, if you're looking at like, see, I think like GA teams especially, like they love numbers. They
Mm.
love like, oh, we're hitting this, we're hitting that. Again, look, it's relative for one testing wise, but the big thing is um, the testing that they do informs what you're going to do.
Yeah.
Now that like so when you come to things like the 3RMs and the 5RMs, yeah, yeah, look, they're look, I suppose, yeah, they're benchmarks, but I wouldn't get too fixated on them too early. Like I'd rather
Mm.
have good movers, and then after getting good movers, I'd like to get them stronger, and as I get them stronger, I get into more formalized kind of strength testing. But I
Yeah.
wouldn't get too fixated too early on. They need to be able to have a back squat that's 1.8 times their body weight or a deadlift that's 2 times their body weight. Because
Yeah.
something might fall off in between.
Yeah. And then when you talk about good movement, so having like full range of motion in different movements like squat, is there any other aspects then that coaches should kind of be looking for?
Um, yeah, I think you just saying gym setting or
Yeah, either or even on the pitch, like when you're just talking about how they move.
yeah, I suppose like you just want to ensure that um, I suppose there's no imbalances that are going to possibly result in them getting hurt. If it's in the gym, you just want to ensure they move well, that they're not going to get hurt. Whatever pattern that might be, that could be like a press. That they're not
Mm.
going to hurt themselves on a pitch. Um, I suppose the pitch is a little bit different. Like you want to ensure that how they move is going to make them as efficient as possible on the pitch, but also they're not going to get hurt. Like if someone decelerates and change direction, that their torso ankle and their shin angles as they approach change direction are such that they're not going to have a huge amount of shearing force around their knee if they change direction.
Yeah.
So there's a huge amount of coaching in that. And I think that's things people mightn't realize is that you could set up like some type of agility test, like a T test, and someone does it really, really well. But like that doesn't tell me how they're going to actually deal with a decision on a pitch and change direction and hopefully not get hurt. So like I just be really like that's why I suppose I'm a lot of my work has been in like the youth side of sport is
Mm.
around trying to embed good movement patterns in young players that by the time they get to adult sport that we don't have to rectify these issues, that they know how to accelerate, they know how to decelerate, they know how to change direction, they know how to jump and land, they know how to lift in the gym. um, and then all you're doing then when they get to adult level is you're refining a lot of those things, you're reinforcing a lot of those things, and then you're focusing on like performance outcomes, stronger, faster, bigger,
Mm.
those kind of things. But yeah, I would be, I suppose, a huge proponent of um, I just want to ensure that players move well first and foremost. They stay injury free, they're robust, and after that, you focus on the bigger, stronger, faster performance
Mm.
outcomes. I think
Yeah.
everyone wants to focus on the performance outcomes first before
Yeah.
you think about um, how do they move. And we live in a world where we're fixated on even underage success. That's the parameter of have we been successful as coaches or strength and conditioning coaches. I would be looking at we're successful as underage coaches if we've taken a group of players and we evaluate them at the start and we reevaluate them at whatever period and they've got better in those different areas that we focused on.
Mm. Yeah, I get you. And you mentioned just earlier about, say, at the start of or during training sessions where there might be a block for this is your physical work and then this is your skills work. But I guess the research a lot of the time now would be around game based training and how you can improve fitness levels while doing conditioning games and things like that. So is there different ways that you can fit in fitness levels into, say, small sided games that will or fitness work that will kind of help that side of things?
Yeah, you can. Like, like from two different perspectives. Like you can develop skill in a gains based approach at almost any age, and you can obviously develop conditioning from a gains based approach at any age. The issue is the setting you're in. Can you actually track it? Like if you're in a setting that you don't have GPS, how can you identify if players have done what you need them to do to
Yeah,
appropriately get more condition? So there might be a need for like more linear type conditioning in certain settings if you can't evaluate the conditioning. But obviously, like the sport is the key thing. Like they need to be specifically conditioned to play the sport. They're not going to do a huge amount of straight line running, but we do need a certain element of that to
mm,
top up maybe, or to just just I suppose to ensure that they are conditioned enough to play the game. But ultimately, what you'll see in a lot of professional sports is um, they'll try and integrate the game into both the conditioning side of things and you know playing the game, trying to figure out the game, break down the
yeah.
game, all those kind of things. So the more you can seamlessly integrate those things, the better. And obviously, in Ireland, Paul Kinnerk and his research
Mm.
would be would be where you'd see a lot of that. But yeah, if you can kind of get there, you're onto a winner anyway.
Mm. And traditionally in the GA, a lot of teams when they come back, they're doing these heavy runs. Like the first few sessions, first few weeks, it's going to be say an RPE of 9. That kind of level of intensity you're looking at is. Would you recommend now, even say club teams, that they're not going into like really heavy running? That's going to be really taxing on the CNS. Like maybe more things like tempo runs initially on, or how would you approach the initial months say of preseason training?
I'd start small and I gradually increase it. I think
Mm.
we go in and we do a really heavy session and nothing really happens. No one generally gets hurt, but it's going to be like a cumulative effect. 3 weeks later, people get hurt because no matter what the load is, it's still a spike from no load.
Mm.
So like if you haven't done anything in a number of months and you come back, and even if it's even if it's a moderate load, it's still a big spike from nothing. So my approach would have always been, and this is the advice I would have given the coaches I would have worked with in the last number of years, but we just gradually increase it, keep it small. Um, like I worked at a club last year and we tried to keep the session around 60 minutes at the start, 55,
Mm.
60 minutes, and other clubs would be running for 2 hours, because
Mm.
more is better. But um, yeah, I think the most important thing in the sport is you have your best players available when you need them, and if you're running excessively, um, and you've got guys breaking down consistently and they're not available to play the game, well then, you know, what really matters? I think as sports scientists or strength and conditioning coaches, we kind of have to realize that we supplement the sport. Like our responsibility is to ensure that players, first and foremost, are available to play.
Mm.
Everything else is a bonus. Like if they're performing at a max level, it's fantastic. But the first and foremost is that they're actually available to play the game, that they're fit, they're healthy, and they're on the pitch. And if we're not managing the load appropriately, especially at that start of the season, then it's all going to come to a head weeks or months down the line, because like how loads accumulative, like it
Mm.
will build up over time. Like it's rare that it's that spike that's going to cause the injury. It's the cumulative load over a month or more that's going to cause that injury.
Mm. I'm just curious as well about your approach to gym work and fitting it around training. Like I know there's obviously loads of different ways you can do it. You can have, say, a power session before you go out onto the field. You can have players do them on separate days. Even a split between maybe one upper session, one lower session, and then a full body power session. Is there any best practice in your view? Does it kind of depend on different factors when it comes to a team, or what way would you approach aligning the gym work with what they're doing on the pitch?
Yeah, look, it vastly depends. It depends hugely on the experience of the players. It depends on the schedule. It depends on the period of the year. Like I was saying earlier, um, if I have a group of very inexperienced players, my focus is going to be primarily on, can I get them at the appropriate strength and uh, body composition to play the sport initially.
Mm.
If you neglect that and try and focus on something around like a performance outcome in the sport, you're just going to have to go back that initial thing again. So like I would always group. teams into like different groups or different demands or different needs.
Mm.
So I'd have a group that this is their focus, another group that's their focus, and so forth. So if I have a very experienced players, which, to be honest, in a club setting in the GA, is rare enough that you're going to have someone that is like, you do get an intercounty level, but at a club level, unless it's a very experienced club level, you mightn't have too many players that are incredibly experienced, have a really good literacy in the gym, have a
Mm.
very good training age of a number of years. So I think what we see from like from a textbook around, like, even it's a concurrent or a block periodization, we'll do this, we'll do that,
Mm.
we'll put these two modalities together and we'll do strength and power, doesn't always fit, because we're trying to apply something to a player that it might not be the best approach for.
Yeah.
So like, it's probably not a very easy, it's not a straightforward question to answer, because I suppose you need all the information about the player, about the schedule, about the time of year, about the team, about the sport, before you can say this is the exact approach that I'm going to take with programming for these athletes. But
Yeah. Yeah, because obviously in any group you're going to have a certain section of players that need to work on body composition and getting leaner, and then you've another potentially younger set who just need to put on a bit of bulk to actually be able to compete, and then you probably have a middle section as well who it could be speed or power that they're looking for. So
yeah,
would you kind of have, like, you'd have them all in the gym at the same time, but then different
they've been
guys be
doing
breaking
things.
away doing different things. Yeah.
Yeah, like yeah, exactly. That's exactly the approach. Yeah, I just group them into different kind of needs, and like, if I've got an experienced group, like, it will look like a traditional periodization around. They might come in and like, they have appropriate strength levels, they have proper lean muscle mass. They might do a little bit of hypertrophy, just to kind of, I suppose, prepare them for the next thing that's going to come, which might be a bit of maximal strength, if I'm
Mm.
taking a linear approach. And then they
Yeah.
might go into a bit of explosive strength or speed strength or whatever they need. And then you're focusing on like a maintenance period program when they get to like competition time. So like,
Yeah.
you will see that in a lot of programs. I suppose the argument I'm making is that that doesn't apply to everyone. It doesn't apply to the 18-year-old who's come out of minor and he fits into this program just because he's on the senior team. Like,
Mm.
that player might need 3 years to get up to the appropriate strength and physical size and experience in the gym to actually be able to undertake that gym program. You
Mm.
know, and
Mm.
I think that's the approach that sometimes skip, that we all see by the time it gets to championship level, that that player is doing a speed and power program. You
Mm.
know,
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing as well around. I like the idea of it's an art versus it's a science, and you can really go heavy on the text and what the literature says we should do. But then at the same time, from your experience working with teams over a number of years, you just pick up the intricacies of how you need to adjust things. And even when you're on the pitch, a certain night you might pull a set of runs because the players are tired, that kind of
yeah,
stuff as well. So
yeah, yeah. Well, like I suppose the big thing is that, like, for me, the big thing was always strength. Like, I always try to get players as strong as possible, within reason,
mm,
because I suppose strength underpins everything. Stronger you are, the less like you're going to get hurt, and it's going to facilitate everything afterwards. Higher strength levels, it's going to have a bigger impact on the amount of force you can produce than because your rate of force. It's going to have a big impact on all that. But yeah, no, there is a bit of, I wouldn't maybe an art, maybe it's just a bit of an experience.
mm,
Like you plan things out. Like, I say, if I'm taking like I've got I program tempos, or I programmed different kinds of mass runs at one portion of this season. Um, you might plan X amount, and then you might realize after a couple runs that, like, if the pitch is heavy, the
mm,
weather is, it's raining right into them. It's impossible. They're just slogging up and down, and then you're kind of going, is this as beneficial to them as it can be? You might look at, like, is there a massive decrement in the times they were hitting in the first set of runs to this set of runs, and if they're considerable, and then um, they're not achieving what they need to achieve. Say if it's a tempo, then you're kind
mm,
of going, what's the point? So then,
yeah,
then you will have to adjust, and that's kind of where you have to be able to stand over, like, making those decisions. And you learn, I think coaches will learn that over time. The other thing then is, like, realizing, like, and I heard this from a coach before, realizing, like, when to stop a session. I think modern sports scientists, like modern coaches, are so fixated on load and so fixated on GPS that they'll stop a session dead. But
Mm,
again, you have to be able to look at the session as a whole and say, can we do a little bit more, or should we do a little bit more? And that's kind of when that experience probably comes to play a little bit.
mm, yeah. I want to touch on the new rules as well, and you mentioned just before we started chatting there that you were involved in a group responsible just for looking at some very early results in terms of the sort of physical demands of what the new rules in football will hold. But if you were involved now still with the Clare footballers, how would you approach that? Would you prioritise anything a little bit differently in terms of the running that they would be doing or physical training that they'd be doing to prepare for it?
Like you said, it's very hard because we're just making assumptions on how the sport will change depend on the new rules.
Mm,
Firstly, I'm as a spectator, I'm really excited with the new rules. I think the three up um, is going to revolutionize the game. Now, there's other elements that we'll have to wait and see. From a basketball perspective, I love the 2 point arc. I just think time is winding down. That could be a really exciting thing. It's a pity
mm,
Conor McManus is after retiring because
yeah.
he would have been a man that you would have loved to see come on the end of a ball, with a second to go. But yeah, I think it's probably going to have an impact from a physical perspective. Um, to be honest, I don't know. And I'd only be just trying to hazard a guess around how it's going to impact. We'll find out really quickly,
Mm,
in the, I suppose this league will be a trial period. You'll see, I think it will impact your wing forwards quite a lot. I think they'll be required to do a lot more than they've had to do before, and they've always been asked to do a lot.
mm,
Same with the wing back positions. Um, it's going to change the contest in midfield. I think you're going to be trying to look at players of a different physical stature because it's going to come back to a real contest with the kick out. So athleticism, size is going to come into play. You're not going to be able to get away those little kind of dinky kick pass or little kick outs to players on the wing. Yeah, it's definitely going to evolve the sport. Which is going to evolve the role of the strength and conditioning coach. It's going to evolve the role of everything. It's going to evolve the role as a coach from a tactics perspective. But I think we're at such an early stage,
mm,
very hard to tell how it's going to impact the demands of the game. Like back in 2012 when Donegal, and it may have happened before this, but when Donegal went ultra defensive, no one realized how it was going to impact the physical demands of the game, and it did dramatically
yeah.
impact the physical demands of the game. So this is another juncture in the sport around how these rules are going to impact the physical demands of the game. And look, it's interesting. I'm looking forward to going to a few games over the league and seeing how it plays out. I would have seen a few games behind closed doors and things, and yeah, it just I would say players are a little bit revitalized. I'd say they're a little bit
Mm,
invigorated to play the game because it's a bit more open, it's a bit more expansive. It does really bring back a more attacking style of the game, which I'd imagine as a player you'd be excited to play, and as a spectator, no one likes sitting through 5 points to four game
mm.
in the winter,
Yeah, and yeah, I think the early signs, indications from players are that it is good to play. And I just want to touch on a couple of things around underage players as well. And I know you're obviously doing a PhD at the moment around talent ID and player retention. You compiled some really interesting research into underage players on development squads in Clare. Would you be able to just bring us through that and just kind of explain your main findings from that?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I'm kind of 3.5 years into now, so I'm hopefully almost there. I've still got a bit to do, a few articles to finish, but yeah, it's been eye opening. Like my initial reason for going into it and what I was looking to investigate has evolved massively to kind of what we learned. So what I initially wanted to do, Kevin, was just get a semblance around the talent ID process in the country. So like why coaches were picking who they were picking,
Mm,
and it was never could we get better identifying players, because I think that's just a needle in a haystack. It's actually it's near impossible to identify talented individuals at 13, especially prior to maturation. Um, and there's so many factors that impact future success. But what we did learn was, um, I suppose what it did impact was the purpose of underage systems in the GA. Like, what is the actual function of an underage academy? And for years, it was to win. It was to win under 14 in hurling at Tony Forrestal, or the Arabon at 15, or go on and win a minor at 17, because everyone thought that success in those competitions led to future success.
Mm.
And there's zero correlation between success in those competitions. And there's zero correlation between success at minor or 20s competitions and future success. Like, people would think if we have a very good minor team or a very good under 20s team, we're going to win the senior championship. It just doesn't happen. So what that shifted in our mentality was, what is the purpose of what we do? And what we looked at, what we do is, can we create an environment that we can encompass as many players as possible proportionally in the playing population of a county? So say, like, if I gave Clare as an example,
Mm.
what number of players we need to take in that we can have a very big impact on the club structure as a whole? Can we bring players to a really good system where we expose them to sports psychology, nutrition, strength and conditioning, give them a really good experience, and then try and ensure that as many of them go on to play club adult hurling and football as possible? Like, what's the attrition rate going to be from the players that we take in?
Mm.
And from some of my research, I tracked players in Clare over 30 years, from 1985 up to, I think, 2016. 2016. And 25% of the players that were selected to an under 14 team never went to play senior for their club. Now, I can't
Yeah.
ascertain why they didn't, but they didn't. They might have gone play another sport. They might have done something else. They might have stopped playing the sport. But it was interesting when I was gathering this information. I had to speak to people to gather the information. A lot of them would say, "Oh, he was just a big young fella," So he was
Mm.
selected purely because they were going to win. So there was a bias inherently there around why they were picking people, and they were just picking them to win, and then they would fall off eventually, that kind of way. But
Mm.
what we've looked at now, and again, like, I've moved on from Clare, but what we looked at from the last maybe 5 or 6 years, that the players that we brought in under 14 level, and we brought in 4 times as many players as we would have brought back in 30 years ago, but 98% of the players have gone on to play for
Okay.
their club at senior level. And that's our big goal. Like, our big goal is, can we have a massive impact in club structures, and can we help support clubs in their delivery of not just strength and conditioning, but like their delivery of how they coach the sports. So can we just better experience across the board? We're a very different organization, the GA, than professional sports are. Like, if you're looking at in the UK and soccer, like, they have a
Mm.
very clear directive. Like, their directive is create first team footballers, professional footballers. Our objective isn't that, because there's only 35 places on any senior county team. So we can't, it's a funnel effect anyway. Like, we can't take
Yeah.
all the underage players and just, they're going to go play senior. Because if they do, in 6 years, if 6 players come in, you have a brand new squad. So it just doesn't work. So my advice would be, focus far more on the development of the players and the experience of the players than the pursuit of trying to win something for the sake of winning something. Like, if you win something by doing everything right, it's brilliant. If you
Yeah.
do all the things right, like, you focus on the development players, you don't neglect anything, that's fantastic. But if you fixated on winning an underage competition and something's neglected along the way, and you haven't focused on player development, then it's going to have an impact down the line.
Yeah.
Like, ultimately, you're looking at, I suppose, we looked at lots of different transition routes. We looked at the transition from under 14 up, 15 up, 16 up. We looked at current intercounty players, what was their route to senior success. So we looked at lots of different angles, but the one thing that never really changes is, it's roughly about one player a year
Yeah.
needs to make a senior team to keep a senior team sustainable. That's all it takes. I think it's
Okay.
1.3 players a year. So you'd be hoping that out of a under 20s group, that maybe 3 players make it into a senior team, and one of them is going to stay, and that will keep a successful senior team. So if you have got a really, really good under 20s team, the likelihood is only a very small proportion are actually going to make it to the senior team. So yeah, I think what I've learned anyway is the process is far more important than
Mm,
the the outcomes along the way. Like, can we have a
mm.
really, really good, robust development squad system to help support our club structures?
That's really interesting. And just the last one for you, because I know you have to head off, but the concept of bio bonding then for underage players, like we would have heard about this a bit with in New Zealand rugby, where players of a certain physical maturity are going to be paired together rather than their chronological age. But can you just go into a bit of detail on that in the GA? And I presume it was Clare that you were doing it with. How did that go?
Yeah, we would have implemented. Yeah, just to backtrack a small bit. So, and like Fionn Fitzgerald's research would be to the forefront of GA at the moment in
Yeah.
biobending. Um, the first thing we needed to do was just gather the data on the players. So we wanted to identify where they were in their maturational process. So like were they pre, circa, or post PHV, and having that information would help inform us better around how we program, how we inform the coaches, tracking how they were growing as well, so we could, I suppose, identify the risk of injury. Were they rapidly growing? Were they not rapidly growing? Are they more susceptible, less susceptible to different injuries? So that was the most important thing, first and foremost, was getting a semblance of the data and how that informed our practice. The biobanding is just, I think, as Fionn would say, is like the cherry on the top. Like it's a
Okay.
really nice intervention that can help create a little bit more of a developmentally appropriate environment for the kids to play in. And what I mean by that is, um, every kid might be chronologically 15, but biologically there could be a disparity of 5 or 6 years between the least and most mature. So you could have a
Mm,
group of 15s and you could have a guy who's biologically 13 and a guy who's biologically 18. So when they stand up next to each other, not just from a physical stature, because they could even be this similar heights even at 15 and 13, um, but from an advantage that they've got by going through puberty could be dramatically different. They're going to be stronger, they're going to be faster, they're going to have a bigger aerobic capacity, the bigger lung, bigger heart. They're going to be more confident. So that affects everything. So the biobanding, the rationale behind the biobanding was: can we just create an environment where you're not hampered by the fact that you maybe haven't developed at the same rate or as early as somebody else or as late as somebody else? And the findings of it are fascinating. So, say the late matures, usually they play like on the periphery of the game. They play on the wing positions. They don't
yeah.
get involved in the kind of physical exchanges, and they have one very distinct experience of the game. It's those positions. When you put them all in the group where they're all physically the same, they have a different experience. They've got to make different decisions. They
Mm,
maybe get a little bit more freedom in the game because they're not running into someone who's twice the size of them that can just push them out of the way. They're contesting for ball above head, which they mightn't have done before, and they're just making different decisions. Um, the early mature, the early developed players or the earlier maturers, generally they rely on uh, their physical stature to play the game. So they can run through players, they can catch the ball, they can take 4 or 5 steps without being touched. They're now playing in an environment where they're playing against guys of the same, or girls of the same physical stature,
mm,
and they don't have as much time in the ball. They don't have as much time to make decisions. They can't rely on their physical capabilities. So they have to problem solve. They've got to figure out the game. And they've got a completely different experience. And it was really interesting. We interviewed the players after we did this, and that was their experience. It was like, I was kind of scared for the first time playing a game because I was getting hit from both ways, getting hit from the side or another guy coming hitting from the other side. And I had to like get rid of the ball quickly, and I was making mistakes because I was giving a bad pass because I didn't have much time to think about it. So it just changes the experience the players have, and it just takes away the kind of guise of physical stature as being something you can rely on. So
mm,
it's a very interesting approach. What's key, I think, is getting as much information prior to doing as possible, so really understanding why you're doing it, not just rushing straight into biobending, and to just have as much information as possible before you do it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, Rob, that's absolutely fascinating. I know you need to head on now, but thanks very much for coming on today. I learned a huge amount myself, and I know any coaches listening will take a lot from that as well. So,
Yeah,
really appreciate you giving your time, and best
yeah,
of luck with everything going forward.
no problem. Appreciate it, Kevin. Thanks for